The union of Denmark and Norway under the Danish crown, which had lasted for around 300 years, came to an end in 1814. Denmark had been on the losing side in the Napoleonic War, and was required by the victors to cede Norway to Sweden. The Norwegians themselves were not happy about being handed from one set of overlords to another, and resisted. Their representatives declared for independence, adopting a constitution and electing a king of their own. Norway even fought a brief war with Sweden, which was a military defeat for the Norwegians, but their resistance did gain them a better deal from Sweden. The Norwegian-Swedish union went ahead, but Norway's autonomy as a kingdom with its own constitution and parliament was recognized. The union was ultimately a personal one. The King of Sweden was also the King of Norway. This arrangement persisted, despite many tensions and frequent disputes, until Norway won full independence in 1905. The marginalized and neglected status of Norway, always a subsidiary realm under the rule of one or other of its Scandinavian neighbors, fueled rising Norwegian nationalist and secessionist sentiment throughout the 19th century. Norway's long history, its language and culture, its distinctive society, and not least the Norwegian landscape itself, sustained a powerful sense of independent identity and a resentment of foreign rule. These debates around nationalism, national identity, and independence were themselves shaped by the crises and tensions of an age in which industrialization, urbanization, and emigration were dislocating traditional social structures across Scandinavia, and hunger, poverty, and disease were widespread. As the century wore on, resurgent Norwegian national feeling found powerful expression in the arts, with painting playing a leading role. The creativity and innovativeness of Norwegian artists in the 19th century, and the high profile they achieved in Europe, is all the more remarkable given the challenges faced by artists in Norway, a nation with only a small community of artists and a lack of patronage, career opportunities, and institutions. There was no Academy of Arts in Norway until 1909, and although there was a School of Art and Design and an art society in Christiania, as the capital Oslo was then called, training and exhibition opportunities were very limited. 19th century Norwegian artists were accustomed to studying and developing their careers outside their own country, in Denmark, Sweden, and Germany, and later in France and Italy. Norway's landscape played a central role in the development of a distinctive Norwegian artistic identity. The grandeur and beauty of Norway's mountains, forests, and coasts was celebrated by artists of the early 19th century Romantic age as exemplars of the sublime and the beautiful in creation and the power of nature. For artists seeking to explore ideas of Norwegian nationhood in art, depictions of Norway's sublime landscapes became expressions of national sentiment, but within a framework of universal philosophical and aesthetic values, in a style of painting known as National Romantic. The National Romantic school, which was strongly influenced by contemporary trends in German Romanticism, depicted sweeping and beautiful landscape vistas that were both all-encompassing in their scope and precise in their crystal-clear depiction of details. Nature's grandeur and the ordered beauty of creation in everything, from verdant forests to barren ice fields, from the great to the small, was presented in order to stir elevated and universal sentiments in the viewer. The painter Johann Christian Dahl was a pioneer of this style, and is sometimes called the father of Norwegian landscape painting, although his own background, born in Norway, trained in Denmark, and spent his career in Germany with German artists as his closest associates, indicates the complexities of 19th century Norwegian artistic identity. Other Norwegian artists with strong German connections, such as Hans Gude and Adolf Tidemann, followed Dahl in combining their feeling for their native land with the prevalent romanticism of German landscape painting, producing works which celebrated the sublime and dramatic landscapes of Norway and the distinctive cultures and ways of life with which they were associated. That Norwegian national romantic painting should have not only German origins but a strongly German character was an irony which was not lost on its critics among Norwegian artists, who increasingly sought different and, they believed, more authentic ways to express the identity of Norway. The artificial and synthetic nature of national romantic landscape, with artists painting not directly from nature but composing highly manipulated and highly finished works in the studio, was also increasingly criticized, as ideas of landscape painting developed, largely under French influence, during the latter half of the 19th century. Accordingly, a later generation of Norwegian artists, who were increasingly looking to France rather than Germany for training and experience, engaged with their country's landscape in different ways. Open-air painting was now favoured over the production of huge and polished canvases in the studio. Authenticity was sought in method, subject matter, and treatment, and romanticism was increasingly challenged by realism. Careful observation and faithful representation of Norwegian reality, it was believed, would provide the basis for a truly Norwegian national school of art, which was itself aligned with the broader politics of Norwegian national self-determination. A central figure in these developments was the painter Kitty Kielland. Christina Lange Kielland, always known as Kitty, was born in 1843 in Stavanger in the south of Norway, to a wealthy and prominent mercantile family with many distinguished members. Her brother, Alexander, became one of the most important and influential Norwegian writers of the 19th century, while other relatives had notable careers in finance, politics, academia, and government administration. Kitty showed an early interest in art, but only took it up seriously in her 20s, after a knee injury left her in need of stimulating sedentary occupations. In the 1860s, she received instruction from a female artist active in Stavanger, Fanny Zoyton, and in 1870 spent time in Christiania, where she trained with the landscape painter Morten Muller, whose even tonality, concern for atmosphere, and faithfulness to place were clearly influential upon her. In 1872, encouraged by the painter Hans Goede, who had seen her work and been impressed by it, she decided to seek more formal training with Goede, who was a professor of art at Karlsruhe in Germany, and to pursue an artistic career. There was some opposition in her family to this decision, but Kitty, a strong and determined character, was not easily opposed. Her brother Alexander supported her in her ambitions, and eventually her father, who was himself an amateur artist, came round as well. As with so many Norwegian artists of her era, both women and men, Kielland went to Germany for training, but unlike her male contemporaries, she could not enroll in any academies of art, studying instead privately in the studios of practicing artists. This photograph from 1873 shows her seated on the right with some of Goethe's other female pupils in Karlsruhe. While a student, she was outspoken on the rights of women artists, condemning the exclusion of women from art academies and from life schools. On that subject, it is important to note that women's rights were a lifelong cause for Kielland. She wrote and spoke often against the subjection of women and for equality, engaging readily in polemics and public debates, and in 1884 was one of the founders of the Norwegian Association for Women's Rights, which still exists today. Kielland studied with Goethe in Karlsruhe from 1873 to 1875, and then moved on to join the growing contingent of Norwegian artists in Munich, where she trained with the German artist Hermann Beisch and with Elif Petersen, who was also from Norway, and whose studio attracted many Norwegian students. Kielland's time in Karlsruhe and Munich was very fruitful for her, but she soon became convinced, as did many of her Scandinavian contemporaries, that she had to spend time in Paris if she was to gain an understanding of the latest trends in art. Accordingly, in 1879 she moved to Paris with her friend Harriet Backer, who had been her housemate in Munich, and who would, like Kielland herself, become one of the most successful Norwegian artists of her generation. In France, she took life drawing classes at the Académie Julian and the Académie Colarossi in Paris, painted interiors showing modern life, and travelled into the country, painting en plein air in Normandy and Brittany. She studied with the self-taught landscape painter Léon Germain Pelouse, who sought in his work to represent nature not in idealized form, but in the reality of ordinary landscapes, interpreted with honesty and directness. She also found inspiration in the artists of the Barbizon school and the French naturalist painter Jules Bastien Lepage, the proto-symbolist Pierre Puvis de Chavannes, and the work of the Impressionists. Kielland's deep engagement with these ideas and influences placed her by the early 1880s at the forefront of current developments in landscape painting. Her work attracted notice, and she exhibited consistently and successfully at the Salon. Kitty Kielland spent significant periods abroad in her early career, but, unlike many other Scandinavian artists, never became an expatriate. Her home was always Norway, and she regularly returned to paint there while a student in Germany and France, bringing to her work the new insights and techniques she had acquired. In 1889 she returned home permanently, settling in Oslo, where she remained for the rest of her life. She continued to exhibit successfully, including at the 1893 Columbian Exposition in Chicago, and to develop her painting style, which, in the latter part of her career, reflected the contemporary influences of symbolism and expressionism, which were strong in Nordic art from the 1890s. In the last decade of her life, she painted little as her health declined. She died in 1914. During the late 1870s, while making her regular trips home to Norway from Germany and France, Kitty Kielland began to paint in the Jaeren region in the southwest of Norway, a coastal district south of her native city of Stavanger. In particular, from 1877, she began to explore the artistic motifs provided by the peat bogs of the area. Other artists, and indeed other pupils of Hans Gerda, were also painting in this area, but Kielland alone returned to Jaeren in her art again and again, and in depth, over an extended period. The peat bogs of Jaeren offered a very different type of Norwegian landscape from the sublime and picturesque scenery of mountains, forests, steep-sided fjords, and mighty glaciers favoured by the National Romantic School. Jaeren was a low-lying area of moors, wetlands, and low hills, undramatic and generally unregarded. Change was beginning to come to this sparsely populated and poorly cultivated region in the 1870s and 80s, with improved communications, drainage schemes, and technical developments in farming, but this was in its earliest stages at the time Kielland was working here. Digging peat for fuel was then almost the only industry in the area. Kielland painted this picture of a Jaeren peat bog in Paris in 1880. Today it is usually known by the Norwegian title Torvmyr, translated into English as peat moor or peat bog. But when the painting was shown at the 1880 Salon, it was titled Un jour sombre en Norvège, reflecting its dark and solemn atmosphere. By 1880, Kielland had produced many drawings and paintings of the peat bogs of Jaeren, and she used these as a basis for this large-scale rendition. Open-air painting was at the heart of Kielland's methodology, and in her use of preparatory studies she followed the most recent developments in French realist plein-air practice, in which the artist captured not only colours and forms, but the character, the atmosphere of the scene. Kielland's peat bog has none of the drama of the views of mountain and fjord associated with the National Romantic School, but she treated the scene on a large scale, on a canvas over a metre tall, bringing to the picture a sense of monumentality. This feeling is created not only by the size of the picture, but by its composition, specifically the towering, turbulent expanse of the sky. The picture is divided horizontally into two zones, land and sky, with the latter taking up 1/3 of the height of the canvas. But the sky seems very close to the ground. Horizontal bands of cloud in the distance seem almost to touch the far-off hills, while closer to the painter's viewpoint, massed heavy grey clouds roll in from the left, throwing the ground into dark shadow, and creating an air of brooding expectancy. Birds soar and swoop across the face of the clouds, emphasizing the sense of restless movement that fills the sky. In the middle distance, rays of sun can be seen breaking through, and a streak of sunlight can be seen on the landscape in the far distance, about to be shut off as the cloud advances. The peat moor itself is a blend of greens and browns that might seem monotonous, but Kielland shows the great variety that exists within this landscape, using brushstrokes that vary from thick impasto effects to delicate streaks and broken dabs of colour. The peaty earth itself is not uniform in tone, but painted in shades ranging from deep black to reddish brown, and is covered by plant life, including the heathers, cotton grass, and sedge that are characteristic of this environment. Pools of water reflect the sky, and grouped here and there are pyramidal stacks of peat, cut from the ground and left to dry before being carted away for use as fuel. Scavenging birds descend to flutter around these stacks. The viewer's eye follows the patterns they make as they swoop and soar black against clouds illuminated from within by the greyish gold of filtered sunlight. This scene is authentically Norwegian, representative of the region and the nation, and while it is not romantic, it is poetic. Kitty's brother, Alexander, certainly found her work poetic and inspirational. This painting inspired him to write a short story with the same title, told from the point of view of a raven raised as a domestic bird but now free, flying over the landscape of the peat moor, which was once familiar to him, but is now being changed by the hand of man. The story includes a vivid description of the Peat Bog landscape, evoking in words the scene his sister had captured in paint. Kielland returned to the theme of the peat bogs often, and the later pictures, many of which were studies, but were sold by her as finished works, itself a new idea brought from France, reveal ways in which her vision continued to develop and change. The paintings became lighter, and the palette brighter. She raises the horizon line to show more of the land surface in relation to the sky, and the evidence of human impact on the peat bogs is made more evident. She paints more peat stacks, and the carts used to take away the peat. Kielland, as a realist, did not want to reflect the landscapes of Jaeren as unchanging, which would have been just another form of romanticization. The ponds left behind by peat extraction are shown as larger, symbolizing this ongoing transformation, but also reflecting more light and contributing further to the brightness of the scene, suggesting an optimism beneath the pervading melancholy, perhaps echoing the general state of Norwegian national feeling in the 1880s. For Kielland, her paintings of Jaeren were not merely exercises in the artistic representation of external reality, but were an exploration of the relationship between Norway's national character and its landscapes, and an assertion that Norwegian identity did not lie just in mountains and ice fields, but also in more mundane and undramatic landscapes, such as the peat bogs of Jaeren. In 1891 she explained to her fellow Norwegian artist, Christian Krogh, that what I would wish to be able to say about myself as a painter is that I have taught other people what Jaeren is, that I have been able to give even those who have not seen Jaeren a view of the grandeur and richness within its poverty, the delicacy of its lineaments, and its overwhelming power mixed with a touching tenderness, and thereby make them feel that this region of Norway too has its share of national character. I referred just now to the way Kielland's images of peat bogs became lighter over time, and in general her treatment of light became more and more important across her work during the 1880s. This was a period when the light summer nights, characteristic of Scandinavia, were becoming an increasingly prominent motif in Nordic art, as artists sought to express the essence of the region in their work, and to go beyond realism, to evoke emotion and mood. Kitty Kielland, already exploring mood, atmosphere, and the emotional content of landscape, as we have seen, was a profoundly important and influential figure in this movement. In the mid-1880s, she created works which pioneered a new direction for Norwegian and Nordic art. But that is a story for another time.